In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, you are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Do you like scary movies? Well, welcome then, movie lovers and theology nerds, to Popcorn Theology, where we examine films where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm James.
And I'm Kat.
And we are looking at Scream 7, directed by Kevin Williamson and starring Neve Campbell, Jasmine Savoy Brown, Mason Gooding, David Arquette, Matthew Lillard, and Courtney Cox, reprising their roles from the previous films, as well as, let me take a breath, Isabel May, Anna Camp, Michelle Randolph, Jimmy Tatro, McKenna Grace, Asa Germain, Celeste O'Connor, Sam Rechner, Mark Concelos, Tim Simons, and wow, this is a veritable community of a cast, which is convenient because it also stars Joel McHale. How about a plot summary, Kat?
When a new ghost-faced killer emerges in the town where Sidney Prescott has built a new life, her darkest fears are realized as her daughter becomes the next target.
Dun, dun, dun. I should have said take a stab at a summary. That was well done. But
True. You could also argue that you had some spoilers just by listing off some of the cast.
Doe. Or did we, though? That's actually interesting. If you've seen the film, you know what we're talking about. So just because I said a star, you might, it doesn't necessarily mean they are what you think they are. So alive, dead at this point, who knows? When is this series going to go supernatural? Who knows? So no spoilers yet. We'll get to those in a little bit. But let's talk about this. So you and I have been along. Obviously, I don't need to ask you the question. Do you like scary movies?
I do.
Right. What's your favorite? No. But we were back. We saw this in the theater in 1966, if I'm not mistaken.
66?
Not 96. Right.
Like, don't tell people how old I am.
Nice. I mean, 96 probably still tells people something. We were a year into dating. I don't think I had climbed in through your window, but you also weren't on a second story or living with your parents. So what are you going to do? And we have seen all of them, which is probably the only reason nobody else is on this recording from Popcorn Theology, because I'm not sure any of them have seen any except for maybe the first one. So, yeah. And so we're here as your horror correspondents, or at least a couple of them. But we want to talk about what we thought about this one. And we'll probably talk a little bit later about the whole franchise. But for Scream 7, which did do quite well at the box office, what is your popcorn rating, Catherine? Would you call it stale, fresh, or buttered and salted? And bloody? No, go on.
I'd probably say fresh-ish. Maybe leaning toward buttered and salted just because I went in with kind of low expectations. And honestly, this was better than it had a right to be, being that it's the 7th movie in a franchise, that they're heavily relying on some of nostalgia by bringing back some of the original cast. One could certainly
seventh
feel
movie
like
in a horror franchise too, which
in
is
a horror
even
franchise
rarer that it holds its legs.
That has also had some TV spinoffs as well, even though the TV spinoffs wasn't as specifically related. But so the fact that this particular IP has spawned so much content, one could say.
So many screams.
So many screams. The fact that I mean, they're actually getting pretty close to number 8, which is, I believe, how many stab movies there are from the Scream franchise. Anyway, I really enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to. I thought that they played with form and type. It felt like a Scream movie in that sense. The original movie was very much predicated on the fact that it kind of understood its trope, understood what it was, and played with that form a bit. Talking about the rules, talking about who can survive, who doesn't survive in this sort of story. And so I felt like with Kevin Williamson back on board, this again played into some of that. So that was enjoyable. and at least slightly fresh in that sense. I mean, it's a horror movie. There's a lot of tropes that are known. So I thought they did a nice job with that, kind of bringing it into the current century of technology and that sort of thing. So in that sense, it was much better than I expected, and thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah, I got to go solid. I'll go fresh with a blood splatter. This was definitely
Definitely blood splatter. It was gory.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later too. But so I'm going fresh too. I'm going to say maybe one of my favorite. I enjoyed 1, 2, 3. Probably all pretty solid and on a similar playing field. Maybe slightly diminished with 3, but still a solid trilogy. And I enjoyed 4. And as much as I enjoyed 5 and 6, like I'd say they were fresh, but I do feel like this was back to form, and not just because of some of the cast shifts, but I probably like this one at least as much as 4, and maybe as good as some of the original sequels. Too much for you?
No, I would agree with that. Like I said, kind of fresh-ish. Again, just much better than it deserves. Much better than it had a right to be, I think is what I said when I first walked out of the the theater. So
nice. Well, we want to get into spoiler territory, but before we do that, we want to encourage you guys to scream about this episode. If you like it, share it with your friends. Let's broaden the conversation. If you want to hear more, subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Discord, all the things. And one quick way you can help support the podcast is rate and review us. Maybe you're not a writer, but take a stab at it and give us a little review on Spotify or wherever else you listen. And you can always support us financially through Patreon. And we will, for a few bucks a month, you can even vote on more horror movies or more of whatever you would like us to do. Sometimes you actually pick the episode for us. So become part of our Facebook group and special channel on the Discord server, as well as voting on those episodes. Sometimes even a little extra content here and there. So, but we will take a few moments just to give you some other ads, and you can always get some merch and things from our merch store if you'd like. We'll be back in a minute with spoilers dropped and talking more about who lives, who dies, and who made us cry in Scream 7.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane!
Cinemagog, The Marvelous Era. James Harleman here, the cinema guy, announcing the sequel to my first book on film and faith. Let's face it, entertainment has changed dramatically since the first book published in 2012, and comic book characters and franchises are everywhere. So I decided to set my sights on superheroes and examine the evolution of Hollywood in this follow-up to the first Cinemagog book. For example, what does Loki tell us about culture's view of God? Why does the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Infinity Saga continually align with biblical themes? In the Marvelous Era, I review each film and show not only how the individual movies express gospel parallels, but each phase essentially reveals a multi-point sermon. I also explore DC, Star Wars, the Monsterverse, and more. Without compromising scriptural truth, we can sift these stories and discover how we might reject, receive, and redeem ideas for personal reflection and Christian conversation. Also, has Hollywood's messaging gotten worse? The book explores ways these marvelous mythologies correspond with conversion, Christian living, church history, and Reformation, but I do also highlight what has been the entertainment industry's darker, indoctrinating decade, as well as toxic fandom and the dangers of immersion in pop culture that just might drown us spiritually if we're not careful. So suit up, assemble, and join me on a journey to the Infinity Saga and beyond. Cinemagog, The Marvel Us Era. Now available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle editions. And we're back, dropping the spoiler warning as we dig deeper into Scream 7. And before we do that, let's go ahead and talk briefly about our theology ratings. We did our popcorn ratings just in terms of how we enjoyed the film on a fun level. But as far as stuff to talk about, what do you think, Catherine? Is it diluted? Is it actually going to be carbonated enough to talk about much, or is it going to be cup runneth over?
I'll go with carbonated, maybe lightly carbonated. I think it's one of those that you can pull some stuff out of it, but it's not, I don't think it's super deep.
Right. Yeah. It unlike the knife in this movie, it does not cut that deeply.
Yes.
But it's carbonated. I think that this franchise kind of revisits the same themes over and over. So at some point, you kind of feel like, all right, the cup's not filling up anymore, but each time is another chance to revisit some very basic ideas, which I am excited to talk about. So, but
And I
let's,
think that
yeah,
this one had a couple of kind of new threads in the sense of the last
fair
couple
enough.
movies definitely brought up like a next generation sort of idea, and 4 stabbed at that if we
Yeah.
keep that going. Um, but this one specifically was definitely about the originators training up or how they disciple the upcoming generation.
All right. We'll get to that. But let's make sure we talk a little bit more about our spoiler-filled popcorn moments. So we'll pop some popcorn and talk about that. So what was it maybe for you in this one that you liked or maybe didn't like about this one? And what were the standout moments for you?
I appreciated. Again, I think Scream managed to roll into sort of that meta commentary again, which has always been part of what makes the Scream movies kind of fun. They're very self-aware. They understand what they are, right? They're a slightly elevated B-level slasher flick, right? But you get some humor and some fun in it because they seem aware of what they are, right?
I was going to say, because you don't
Am
like
I
slasher flicks.
I don't generally like slasher flicks. That's very true. Um, but these ones do have kind of that sort of meta twist. And I think that this one was kind of fun in that it once again found a way to play with it. And I mean, you could call it an Ouroboros. It's actually sort of eating its own tail at this point because it's now a meta commentary on
Meta commentary.
conspiracy theories people have about the Scream movies themselves. Did Stu survive? Was it possible for Stu to survive? And so I appreciated.
It was fun to see him, even if he wasn't real.
Yes,
we dropped the spoilers, so too late, guys.
Yep, there you go. So I appreciated that piece of it. That there was, and then too that they're continuing to try and keep a pace with the current generation. Meaning there was a big component of AI and how AI could work to your detriment, or to help you be a horrible person. So
yay.
So that piece of it is always kind of fun and interesting to see how the Scream movies continue to keep pace with what's currently going on. So I liked that. I appreciated having Neve Campbell back as Sydney. Like she's always been a great heroine. I've appreciated that she's smart and capable, that she has, for all of the trauma that she has experienced, they've kept her pretty grounded as a character, in that even when they've said like she's pulled back here, she's come forward here, trying to kind of navigate that trauma and figure out how to live in it. But I appreciate that she's always felt, her responses have always felt realistic based on what has happened, and she's gone about it in an intelligent, thoughtful way. So I've appreciated her character. So it was nice to have that character back. I think Gail's still a little frustrating to me because she still seems a bit narcissistic and predatory in some respects. Just like she's friends with Sydney, but she constantly wants to push the boundaries of that friendship of comfortability in a way that is always a little frustrating. But that feels again true to her character, so they kind of kept her the same throughout it. So I appreciate those kind of long-standing characters that are still navigating and trying to figure stuff out. I really liked the relationship Sydney had with her husband, which is kind of nice. In a horror movie, it was a little bit of a flip of the script that you normally see.
Now, I did not look. I for all the cast members, I did not know Joel McHale was in this until he showed up on screen.
I know.
I was going to say, you didn't tell me if you'd known. So, are you like?
Nope, I didn't know.
I was just I figured you usually know casts better than I do. So when he showed up, I was just like, what? How come you didn't tell? Why didn't you tell me? So.
No, I went into this one pretty blind, which was actually kind of fun then for some of the reveals that they had with Matthew Lillard and for us, Joel McHale, that sort of thing. Some of it was a little gorier than some of the others, so I'm not sure if that's the franchise trying to keep pace with some of the horror movies or what. or what they were doing with that, but it did seem a little extra gory. I had the gal sitting next to me at one point whispered, "Oh, that's vile," when something particular happens.
When they slice open the gal on stage, yeah.
No, I think it was something else, but yeah, there
Oh.
were some spectacularly brutal, a little more visceral deaths than I remember in Scream.
Oh yeah,
But
when
at
he's
the same
turned into a
time,
beer tap. I think that was the other one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, looking back, there are I mean, the movies have always been gory. So
It felt
those are kind of
gorier and
the
more intense to me. That was one thing I kind of felt like it didn't need that. I think Scream has
Mhm,
functioned with a little less quite effectively. But
mhm.
that was something if I had to do it didn't like, I was like, that seemed unnecessary. It was like, that seemed unnecessary. It was just kind of one step too far. But
Yeah. Um, and yet at the same time, I don't think, as even in the first Scream movies, it was rated R primarily for violence, not for sexuality. And
yep,
so I do actually appreciate that they've kind of kept that as well. There isn't a lot of um, over the top nudity, over the top sex scenes, those sorts of things, even though it is sort of a teen slasher flick. Um,
yeah.
they're on the softer side of that, which I do appreciate as well. So yeah, I don't know. How about
I,
you? Did you have any
I
particular
liked how
standout moments?
most of your I liked was I liked the relationships here and relationships there, and my first thing is I liked it when Ghostface got hit by the car.
Yeah, no, in fact, our screening cheered when that happened. That was fun. That was actually, yeah.
I think this almost renewed my faith in seeing movies in the theater again. I think there was just the right amount. Nobody was on their phones, which I mean for a Scream movie, I, I it's kind of funny. But so people were off their phones as appropriate. People were not talking a lot, and they were only making noise or small or brief comments when there were big moments. And
Yes.
you go back to watching like Avengers Endgame in 2019, when everybody cheers when Captain America catches the hammer. Oh, spoiled that one
Yeah.
for everybody. Right, there were only those moments, cheering when he got hit by the car,
Yeah.
or a shocking moment of revulsion with maybe it's just some ooh, or a few comments like vile, and that was
Yeah.
a great group experience. So maybe
It
anybody who
was.
hasn't seen this movie yet, shame on you for all the spoilers we've just given, but uh, it's worth seeing with a group. Like sitting and watching this on your phone, I don't think is going to be very exciting, and maybe just by yourself, I don't know, but like seeing it with a few people who are going to be into it. I think that definitely makes a difference. I did appreciate Joel McHale. I want to talk about the family dynamic later. The Meeks Martin siblings felt unnecessary. They felt
Yeah,
jammed in.
they felt like the carryover
Yeah,
from the movie before, so they were trying to kind of keep that going. Plus, they represent sort of that meta commentary aspect. They had to have someone there that was
yeah.
into movies, into horror movies, that could kind of provide the rules and some of that commentary and comic relief. But
But
I agree, they were a little bit.
they could have had one of Tatum's friends like that though. That
Yeah.
that was more into it. Uh, But I also appreciated that they touched on something else, which would be very true. They've had Stab has always been a meta commentary on the in movie Scream movie adaptation, but I also liked the more of the aspect of true crime that kind of came in.
Mm.
Like the obviously the one son whose mother then turns out to be one of the killers. Right? There's this aspect of, oh, that's right, people in this world would be into the true crime podcasts and conspiracy theories about all of this stuff, which is, I didn't realize just how big true crime was, especially amongst women, apparently. True crime
Yeah.
and serial killer stuff. And it's fascinating and maybe a little creepy that's become such a popular obsession for a lot of Americana right now.
Yeah, and it's an easy in. I mean, there's always been the weird letter writing thing that happens, or weird romances that happen between women and serial killers that are in prison. So the true crime podcast thing is just it's an easier in
Yeah.
um to follow those things, or to be fascinated by them.
Well, and as you were
So
saying earlier, Scream has managed to keep its pulse on culture enough to make each film relevant, even though we go back to answering brick phones in the old movie, and it's like they found a way to move along with the times, which is that's pretty cool.
yeah.
They've found new ways, and the fact that Kevin Williamson got to come in and finally direct what might be the final one. Maybe.
I hope it's the final one. As much as I've enjoyed them, I hope it is.
As much as I think this sort of came up a notch, it feels like this should be the drop the mic, I'm out. 7, good biblical number of completion. You just sort of like, we're done. We've done a week's worth. On the 7th, we rest. We're good. So I do agree. Like, I feel like they run the risk of running it into the ground. They should go out on a high note. The box office will probably make the studios choose otherwise, but
yeah,
sigh. But that's a good place to turn then. We're starting to make a couple biblical themes and comments here. So let's get into the deeper stuff as we turn to the theology side of Popcorn Theology and pour some theological soda and get ready to drink deeply, or at least drink mid on the themes in Scream 7. So you had, at least, I know at least one big theme to talk about, and you already alluded to it. So let's talk a little bit about what struck you coming out of this movie.
Well, I think one of the big things that really struck me was again, I'll go for the relationship angle.
Chicks,
the relationship
man.
between
No, I'm just kidding.
Sydney and well, I'll specifically focus on Sydney and her daughter, and the idea of training your children. And that might seem like a bit of a strange thing coming out of a horror movie, but it was very striking with this that Sydney Prescott has had all of these events happen to her, and she's learned a lot from those events. And what she wanted for her daughter was for her daughter to feel safe and protected and not to ever have to experience the horrors that Sydney has gone through. And that is an absolutely wonderful desire to have for your children.
Yeah.
But in the movie and in the way that she's gone about it is she's kind of shut her past off from her child, and she hasn't then imparted to her child the majority of the lessons that she's learned. And as it comes around, those lessons would have been helpful to her child. And so there is obviously an idea of when you teach your child certain lessons, you don't necessarily want to traumatize or terrorize a 5-year-old, but as your child ages, you should be training that. You should be training that child in understanding the world, the dangers that are inherent in it, how you, the other piece of that too is as a parent, you can't control all of the things that your child is going to be exposed to, no matter how much you try. So equipping your child is a much better route to go. And Sydney failed her daughter in that slightly. Not entirely, but slightly.
I
and
see that.
Scripture actually
at least in the first half of the movie.
Yes. And so Scripture speaks to that, that in Proverbs, it says you should train a child in the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not depart from it. That's in Proverbs 22. And then Ephesians 6 even says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. So obviously, Scripture is speaking to the more spiritual, theological side of life, which this movie doesn't address. But in trying to keep her child isolated and quote unquote safe, she did not instruct her in other ways that would actually help her be safe, nor did she disciple her or train her in ways for when Sydney is no longer around. How would her daughter continue then to navigate the world and be safe? Proverbs 13 also says, whoever spares the rod hates their child, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. And then I thought this was kind of amusing. I found Proverbs 19 says, discipline your children, for in that is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death.
Nice. Well, I'm so glad this overprotectiveness and not training thing is something that never hits in the Christian world.
Right. Because you often see like there's a lack of apologetics that's taught in many Christian homes where just what is the foundation of our faith? What is what do we rest on besides just my parents told me this, I was brought up in it, and that's all that I know. Um, Good Christian parents can help their children understand apologetics and theology and even philosophy so that when they go out into the world and encounter those who are opposed to the Lord, they actually have a firm foundation to stand on so that they don't just get knocked about because they're utterly unprepared. They had no knowledge that this was even a thing, or that there was any danger out there, right? Like her child in this movie seems to know a little bit, like something bad happened to mom and now she's super weird and overprotective.
Yeah.
And I think if Sydney had, as her daughter got older, had shared with her some of the things she had learned, let's just start with the basics of gun safety and use.
Yeah, no doubt. Like, daughter didn't even go to the gun range. Come on.
But even that understanding of, even if it's a slightly sanitized version of what had happened to Sydney, then she could explain to her daughter why I'm trying to raise you this way, why I'm trying to protect you from these things. Where I've seen so many Christians try to like diminish or hide the sins of their past. Now, again, in Sydney's case, these were sins that were committed against her. But they try to hide.
Wait. She did sleep
I
with Billy
apologize.
Loomis.
She did sleep with Billy Loomis, therefore she is viable to be killed off. Those are the rules. But so fine. The sins of her past come back to haunt her in a way that she could have better prepared her child for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in that sense, that idea of how you train and discipline your child when you choose to share with them the understanding that you have, so that it's not just your parents putting down these rules that have there's no basis or understanding of what they are for, because many children then rebel and reject those rules because there isn't even an attempt made to explain why they're there.
Well, or they just go off to university and they face the, death by a thousand university professor paper cuts of, I mean, that's the thing that always blows me away is people haven't been raised in their faith, and university professors are running around like ghost faces, just, what's your favorite religion? And then they tear it apart. And
or they just try
kids
to
go out there and they have no defense when they should have been trained to spiritually shoot them in the head. Like, that's spiritually,
Yes.
I said, just to be clear, kids, you want to be able to kill those philosophies. You want to be able to put them to death. You want to put the arguments to death and take them captive to Christ. Like, that's what our scripture talks about. And that's what we often shelter kids with simple Bible stories and do not equip them for myriad questions. I mean, just we had an event. I was sitting with a Muslim this weekend. Even as a pastor with 20 years under my belt, he's firing questions at me about the Trinity, the divinity of Jesus. How could he be God and
Where
man?
does it say this? Where does it say that?
And it's like, oh my goodness, even as a pastor, like I feel like I'm dodging bullets barely, like they're catching me. I got a little nicked and scratched here along the way. You see, even he's testing my faith. I was like, hey, we can't expect an 18-year-old to just leave home and mom and dad with nothing more than a elementary Sunday school education and have their faith hold up and not be stabbed to death. Like that is something that I think absolutely applies to this from a spiritual perspective.
And I think as parents, if you approach it in the mindset of these are the things I've learned and these are how I've learned them, this is what God has done for me, protected me from, saved me from, redeemed me from, if you can approach those things with your child, it's a better foundation for their relationship as well. It also gives them that ancestral line of continuing the faith of your fathers, the faith of those who've come before you, because they can understand that. I would also say, though, to those 18-year-olds who think that they know it all and mom and dad are just old fuddy-duddies, there's Proverbs for you too. It says, listen to advice and accept instruction that you may gain wisdom in the future. So there's two sides to that relationship. But it was interesting to me. I was just really struck by the idea that if Sydney had shared some of her past with her daughter, rather than closing it off, it would have better prepared her daughter for some of these events that arose. Sydney worked hard to protect her daughter, and there were a few instances where then she did provide the instruction that her daughter needed in weird situations, which I did also appreciate. But yeah, it was kind of funny to watch that, just how you train the next generation. And the fact
she didn't even know where they had a panic room in the house. Like, what was that about? Like, surely, from a spiritual perspective, I'm just saying.
Well, and
your child should know where to go seek refuge.
Yes. And her child did have a go bag. Like, she was supposed to have a go bag. So there was at least some discussion of some of these things, because Sydney comes in the room. She's like, where's your go bag? And her daughter's like, oh, that was dumb. I unpacked it. But again, knowing the full story of why we might want to have a go bag could have been better. And there's got to be a way, I can understand, again, there's got to be a way to navigate that without making your child live in fear, because that was what Sydney didn't want. Was she desperately wanted her daughter not to just be cowering under the burden of what had happened to Sydney. But there had to be a slight middle ground to be able to equip your child for the things that they may face. And so that was one piece that I kind of pulled out of it.
I see where you're going with, because I wouldn't characterize Sydney as lazy, but at the same time, I think in a similar way, it's very easy to think, oh, okay, I've set up a nice perimeter. Or sometimes we used to think, right, here in America, we used to think we've set up basically a Christian culture. So finally, this is a safe environment. My kid doesn't need to be trained in the same way I was to maybe face persecution for my faith, or face these, like we came to these shores as a nation and set up what felt like a safe zone. And here we are with then successive generations trained less and less and less in the fundamentals of their faith, walking away, and we see a decline because we kind of thought it was safe. We didn't invest in them. And then when the wolves came, or when the people with stabby knives, spiritually speaking, showed up, the kids weren't ready. Some generations have now been failed by us in some ways. Because for whatever reason, I said Sydney wasn't lazy, but she thought she had created a safe environment so she didn't have to train. I was like, no, the kids, she should have had good gun training. She shouldn't have needed Sydney to walk her. Although I love that the imminent discipleship moment of shooting through the wall and knowing she should have shot the head. It wasn't for lack of trying.
Yes.
But that was probably one of the more fun scenes in the movie. But and it almost worked. So that's and when you see a deficiency, then you got to scramble. You got to pick up and scramble and actually help. Like, okay, maybe I didn't do everything I was supposed to do, so I need to pick up the slack and do it now. And we see Sydney doing that. I'd like to think if they do make a sequel, it starts with like mother-daughter gun range moment, and you see that she's become the crack shot. We can see Tatum has become kind of the weird kid in school because they think she's all a little too survivalist or something. But yeah, I can see where they
did a little of that. They've already kind of done that. So, right, because in the second movie, she was living out in the wilderness with a whole bunch of security systems, and she was very anonymous and stuff. So we've seen Sydney progress as well through some of that, right? She withdrew. A lot of Christians will do that. They'll withdraw. There was a trauma. There was something horrible. I'm scared. You withdraw utterly. Yeah. And then she discovered that's not actually that safe either. So then she tries to put herself out there. Well, okay, maybe I can help other people learn from what I've gone through. She wrote a book. She tried to put herself out there that way. And then I think she'd found a pretty good middle ground at this point. She was living in a small town. She'd gotten married. She's had a child. She was running a business. Like, she wasn't really hiding anymore, but she also was trying not to she was just trying to live her life at that point, right? As scripture can say, like live quietly and be a good citizen. I butchered that verse. But that
was
basic
the
idea was what
message
she was.
translation.
There you go. But that was kind of what she was trying to achieve. And so her failures are small in light of that. But
Except for
yeah, it was
the killer, though, didn't see it that way, right? Right. The next door neighbor
true.
felt that she was withdrawn, hiding, and not being her best self, and the power person that she perceived she ought to have been, or that she aspired to be. There's also that interesting that like retreating to the wilderness. Like Sydney's probably in a right place, but then she gets judged for not necessarily fitting into somebody else's perception of, like, it seemed like the neighbor thought she should have been Laura Hamilton in Terminator 2, just tough girl, right? It just totally
Linda, but yes,
Linda Hamilton. Sorry, but which just makes Tatum John Connor. But from a Scream sense, I mean, that could be where they wind up. But that's sort of people's expectations. But she'd sort of set that expectation apparently with that book that she'd written, or at least it could be read that way.
It could be read that way, but I would argue, and another thing that I think the Scream franchise has played with in the past, you and I being some of the few people that actually liked Scream form, was playing with that idea of the celebrity and fame, and some people lean way too hard into that, right? And I think that was part of what the fourth movie talked about was, well, Sydney got fame because she was attacked. So I'm going to create this scenario where I'm going to get attacked and I'm going to survive. And then that will give me fame and attention and popularity. And that's what that person was chasing.
Yeah.
And then in this one, it was that idea of like, well, you inspired me to do something good-ish. She left an abusive husband, violently left the abusive husband, but she left the abusive husband. But then Sydney didn't live up to her expectations of what she wanted her to be. Oh, you got to be that girl boss. You got to be whatever. You're just boring now because you're trying to actually just live a quiet life and you're not living up to my expectations for you. That's not Sydney's fault. Well, that's a delusional fan importing their psychosis on top of someone else and having unrealistic expectations and deluded understanding of what's going on.
Well, maybe. See, I'll challenge that just a little bit for fun, and that's just to say, I've not read Sidney Prescott's book, and probably none of us have.
Fair,
but that could be another misstep, right? I mean, like, I don't. I think she's a good character. I don't know that means everything she's done is perfect. I was actually thinking about another show I've watched, 30 Rock, where Liz Lemon's character decides to write a book called Deal Breakers and hand out relationship advice that she's woefully under-equipped to do. And so I haven't read Sydney's book, but that may have been therapy for her. Was it a good book? And I would still hold the killer responsible for their actions. At the same time, Scripture does warn that people should not overly presume upon being teachers, right? And so when you write a self-help book or a book to inspire, it's like you do have to watch out for those things. Not all should presume to be teachers. Sydney, I think she's in the best place she could be post-book, living with a family, raising her daughter. Seems to have actually selected people who undergo trauma can select terrible spouses, and we don't see that. We see Joel McHale presented as a strong, good, solid male figure. I was very impressed by that. And they didn't nerf him. They came up with a reasonable reason why he was taken down, and mother-daughter had to finish things off. So I think in every respect, it didn't feel degrading to the man in any way. I almost got upset that his death seemed a little... It was lesser than all the other deaths or seeming deaths in the movie. So I was glad that he wasn't dead. But they kind of took him out in a lame way. But he wasn't dead. He was mostly dead. And so that was good. We'll see him. Yes. Hopefully, if they make the inevitable sequel. Well, see, that's another reason I don't want one, because eventually they'll Dewey him and he'll get killed off. So here's hoping this is the last. I want Joel McHale to go out living. So, but that was what. So that's just the one. That was going to be one of my lightning round, which we might not need because there's not a ton more to talk about. But you mentioned generational and sort of legacy issues a couple times. This movie, by kind of bringing us back to all the killers via AI and kind of having everybody sort of pop out of the woodwork, not just Stu, but then we got little incarnations of each and every one of them. But we even got Maureen Prescott. And we have references once again to Sydney's mom. And it made me just remember that this whole thing, just like the opening of this movie is, what happens at the beginning, boy climbs in through the window, reminding us that one of the rules is the dangers of sex. I even saw it was Nev Campbell was on a talk show promoting Scream 7, going over the rules. First thing they talk about is, right, don't have sex or you will get killed. Like that's a negative. That's a no-no. That's a sin of horror movies. That is the sin that'll get you killed. And Maureen Prescott's problem, now let's be fair, she was sinned against. We find out by Scream 3, I think, that she was raped by a bunch of Hollywood producers. So, I mean, yeah, she got Harvey Weinstein. I mean, it was just, she got messed up. But she brought that back, and just like we were talking about a neighbor being responsible no matter what a book said, she came back and let her trauma cause her to cheat on her husband or justify cheating on her husband with Billy Loomis's dad, with Cotton. So all of that and everything that has happened from Billy Loomis to her illegitimate child has been the consequences of sexual immorality, whether it was the people who raped her or then her infidelity. Every cascading problem is tied back to that. Because then even Sydney writes a book. So even this, like, even though it's indirect, everything cascades from sexual immorality in this franchise. It's kind of just blows my mind when you think about it, that the big thing, and what didn't happen then in this movie, Tatum, they didn't have her have sex. I was only saddened by the one thing, like Mom said, I think that train's about to leave the station, or she threw out one thing about how it's probably coming soon. But I guess her boyfriend got killed, so maybe that delays. I'm not saying it's good he got stabbed to death by Ghostface, but
and that's not a prescription for how you stop it from happening.
Yes. Yeah, parents, that's not how you keep your household following chastity. You not kill the suitors. But I think it's kind of fascinating. You think about a horror movie, you were talking about earlier, they've never really had a lot of nudity, or even they don't show a lot of sex scenes or anything like that in the Scream franchise. It's actually a surprisingly chaste admonition. And here they even had, there was no, I slept with my boyfriend problem. They didn't even break the rule in this movie. But Proverbs 6 says, whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. And it goes on to say, wounds and dishonor they will get. Reproach shall not be wiped away. That's the really interesting part, because you see it has had generational consequences. And I think normally we just think, a lot of times, I mean, culture will say, hey, premarital sex, all these things, like consequence-free, covenantless sex is, what's the big deal? Why is this such a big sin? 1 Corinthians would say it's a sin committed against one's own body, which is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And I'm not saying anything against that verse, but I think even then as Christians, we can just be like, well, this is a sin against myself and my body, but who else is it really hurting? That's like, you look at the Scream franchise. This has led to the death of, I can't even count the number of bodies. This has led to illegitimate children then who become killers. This has led to offspring and even friends getting brutally murdered. And even Sydney, if you go back to that first Scream movie, they're like, well, we can kill you now, Sydney, because we got you to break the rule and you slept with Billy. They would have really messed up Billy's narrative if they couldn't have, like, how would the story have gone if even she hadn't had her own indiscretion? It's just kind of fascinating that this movie is surprisingly anti-adultery. Maureen Prescott rejected her illegitimate son when he came back, which even kind of speaks to, I mean, I'd take that all the way back to Sanctity of Life. Like his life, he was inconvenient and she wanted nothing to do with that child. Like, well, what does that tell you? Like, there's a lot of philosophical roots that spread out from that fill up the cup. As we said, this isn't a cup runneth over theological type of franchise, but the cup's fuller than you think. Right? Proverbs 6 says adultery lacks sense and leads to self-destruction. Like that, we don't understand. We think it's culturally probably one of the, like, we think murder is bad, but look what has caused all of it. The breach of covenant, infidelity. Then, of course, the upset. Billy Loomis is upset that what did that do to his family? Like it destroys so much that we don't even think about, and has so many ripples that we don't even count. And this whole franchise is basically saying, yeah, that's because of sexual morality. People, wake up, and so there's a pretty strong chord to be taken from this for anybody who's paying attention. If you look past the jump scares, there's something to be said about relationships and family, and then just the depiction of this one. I was very surprised to see a healthy, typical nuclear family, and I say healthy even though they had these problems. There's just surprisingly on the spectrum, this is on the healthier side of families, even as they had to deal with that trauma.
Yeah, I was actually, for all of my discussion about Sydney not telling her daughter her past and not being fully or wholly honest with her daughter, it does appear that she was fully and wholly transparent with her spouse.
Yes.
He seemed to know all of that. He seemed to know all of her trauma. He knew they had a panic room. He understood that his wife could take care of herself, and seemed to know why. And yet what was interesting were there were a couple of little exchanges where that he didn't give her a pass if she did something incorrect or if she overreacted to something. And so that's actually a really healthy relationship. Yeah, like her daughter came downstairs wearing a coat, and it obviously kind of triggered a reaction in Sydney, and she reacted somewhat harshly to her daughter about it. And then, of course, her daughter reacted petulantly back at her and flounced off. And Sydney was kind of like, when do teenagers start being nice again? And her husband was like, actually, that one was on you. Like, you overreacted with no explanation and exacerbated your daughter. And so I really, even in those little teeny moments of just, a few seconds here or there, they showed their relationship to be seemingly grounded, honest, and real in a way that was really refreshing and very kind of exciting to see. Especially in a horror movie, you always assume that the husband's going to get, one of the spouses is going to get killed. And usually there's some reason they're a jerk, and so it's okay. And so I really did appreciate that he, and even with his daughter at one point, he was like, he's the chief of police. And his daughter was very scared and was saying, like, I want you to stay with me. And he was kind of like, I can't. It's my job to go stop the guy that's doing this, right? And I appreciated that too. Like he understood his job, both as a father, but also as a protector of the town. He was like, this is actually my job. I'm going to leave you here with people who can keep you safe, and I'm going to go keep you safe by keeping others safe as well. And so it was actually really nice for a fairly short amount of time that you have to see their relationship. I thought they had a nice fleshing out of what we would laud in a relationship.
I feel like if this movie was made even 5 years ago, just because of the cultural moment we were in and some various things going on, it would have been very easy to see and total. I wouldn't have even been surprised if they'd shown, well, Sydney married a very kind of meek and harmless, kind of unassuming kind of guy, and so she kind of had the pants in the family, and so then either he would have got killed in the movie, or he just would have been very easily, shoved to the side, or kind of been not a very masculine presence, as it were. Which I could even understand that. But if somebody goes through trauma like that and has been brutalized by a variety of different, many of the killers being male, like, okay, that they could have gone that way, and I wouldn't even have been really surprised for a couple of reasons. But the fact that they actually had, just a short number of scenes show that she married a guy who's an honorable father, not the killer, and
Not
not
the
an idiot.
killer.
And I'm trying to think of anywhere in the movie where they were at odds. It always felt like they were able to speak frankly to each other and able to then be in sync it was like, hey, she's here. Oh, I got the call. I'm on my way. They showed a very healthy marriage. And I'm very happy anytime I see that. That was definitely one of my redeem moments was, wow, we actually got a healthy marriage in a horror movie, which is kind of renowned for usually showing like an unhealthy marriage usually amplifies the dysfunction of a horror story. And here we got it as a plus and a bonus and a healthy part, a healing part of the story. And they did almost killed him.
I almost killed him. And maybe that's part of the something Kevin Williamson was playing with, is because, as you were saying, like, so many of the relationships in the Scream movies are predicated upon bad relationships, right? Sydney and her dysfunction, the adulterous nature of her mother, and then her father's relationship. The Billy Loomis's house was in all kinds of disarray because his mother definitely did not handle that well. And so then this having actually a steadfast, faithful, laudable, honest and open communicative relationship is almost unheard of. So in that sense, maybe that was them sort of turning that trope on its head. But I appreciate it.
Even the trope, it's the trope from the original 1996 movie, right? The 1996 movie it looked like she had the perfect home. Right? It's this gorgeous house. It's a big house. It's kind of like, how? It's always the Hollywood trope, right? You got how do they afford this big house? Like I think they only had one working parent, although he was but then you find out dad's out of town a lot, mom's cheating on him. There's all this horrible backstory. The killer just like,
well, and at that point the mom was missing or had been murdered, but found murdered, right? She'd been killed. They thought Cotton Weather had done it, right? Yeah. Sorry.
And
had a moment.
Right. So she'd had this perfect home, then had her mom killed, but I actually found out it was because it was totally an imperfect and broken home. And so this kind of flips it back on the next generation. There's hope for healing. So even to the point about earlier, like cascading generational sin, that is also one of the hopes of the gospel, right? That not just having a good nuclear Western traditional family relationship, that doesn't save the day. But the hope of the gospel is that even despite generational cascading sin from Adam, that there is hope of restoration. There is hope of a happy and healthy home. We know that's ultimately in Christ and the kingdom of God and his home, but that there is hope of that we can actually see that the things were turned upside down, but they can be turned right side up. And so it's kind of why I want this to be the end. It's because Kevin Williamson does seem to have flipped it over and given us that there's potential here for a happy home. Tatum, the small things in the family that were out of sync at the beginning are actually righted by some of the tribulation they face. And now there's hope that things could be happy. And
I mean,
she just apparently needs a whole new set of friends. Poor Tatum.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying is encapsulated, I think, by 1 John 1. It says, "But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, purifies us from all sin." And that's sort of what I was alluding to, is walking in the light with your family members, being honest about your past, learning the right lessons from your past, having the wisdom and discernment to learn the right lessons. Because as we've said, someone read a self-help book, got the totally wrong lesson from it. But then, yes, being open and honest, willing to struggle with each other, walk with each other, to disciple each other, to be iron that sharpens iron, helping each other navigate this world, in light of then the salvation and the redemption that we have in Christ Jesus. That's what we're hoping for. And oddly enough, I saw that they definitely don't get to Jesus in the Scream movies, but there was a nice societal picture of that is rare, especially in a horror movie.
Yeah. That's probably a good, especially because then what do we see in The Neighbor? They kill their kid because they're a waste of space. So definitely not a healthy home.
Because he's annoying or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this is, I'm sure we've missed a ton. That's whether we're just talking about Scream 7 or whether we're talking about the whole Scream franchise. There's obviously some other things that we may have missed. So I'd be curious to hear what some of our listeners and some of our patron saints and some of our other popcorn theology folks have to say about Scream, whether it's 7 or the 6 that preceded it. And whether you agree with us that maybe on the 7th it should rest just so it goes out with a bang and not a whimper. We didn't even talk about Ethan Embry, who I was also happy to see show up with all the different kind of cameos. Ethan Embry from, I don't think anybody probably remembers Freaky Links except you and me. But there's a horror blast from the past. Somebody will Google that to see what we're talking about. But hopefully we'll get you back on for either our next horror installment or something critiquing romantic films. So thanks for being on the podcast with me this time, Catherine. And until next time,
thank you.
Keep engaging media from a mindful perspective and a godly perspective. And remember, you are not a mindless consumer.
Thanks for watching this episode of Popcorn Theology. For more content, subscribe on YouTube. Follow and interact on social media to help broaden the conversation. Check out our archive of past episodes at popcorntheology.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and consider becoming a patron saint by supporting us on Patreon, which lets you interact, influence, and enjoy exclusive bonus content.